I was just here about a month or so ago. My executive director and I, his name is Willard Bass, and I'm here today on his behalf, actually. We were at UNC Pembroke for a first-time summit similar to this, and I was just so happy to see so many people of color on the streets, the Lumbee Indians, and I learned a lot that day. Mostly what I learned, I was very disappointed about the racial divide, you know, and how the dominant culture historically pitted the Native Americans against African Americans, and to this day it still is pervasive. So that was very disheartening for me. Just to tell you a little bit about me and why I come to do what I do. I have a story too about a situation happened to me when I was little that stayed with me around race. Actually, I have lots of them, but actually I have lots of them. Yes. But the one that stays with me is when I was pulled aside when I was about 6 years old, going to a predominantly white school. Actually, I was the first African American who was able to go to that school. Right, I was at 50. This was 1957, I think it was, and just when schools were integrated, and I was the only African American child in this white school in my little town in West Virginia. And I had a friend. Her name was Margaret Regina McCrae. I'd never forgotten it because she was my best friend. And we were just pulled aside one day. Well, actually, I was pushed aside by the principal, and she was told to come inside. And when she came back out, because I waited for her, of course, you know, and when she came back out, she came out with her head down, and I said, "What's wrong, Margaret?" She said, "I can't play with you anymore." And that was like my first time, wow, getting some blatant knockdown. I didn't even understand that it was about race, but I guess some part of me maybe did. But I've never forgotten that. And you know, when I went on and went to, was relocated to a northern city in Newark, New Jersey, I got the reverse kind of stuff going on. You know, that internalized racial oppression was creeping in with my relationships with other African Americans. So then it was about region and where you came from, and you were Southern and you were Northern. So didn't quite understand it, but you know, it's always been a struggle. Then going on to college, going to Boston University and being the only African American in my curriculum, and racism in 1970 at its height in Roxbury. Going there and Black Panthers on the streets pulling us aside, telling we didn't need to be there, we need to be making babies for the revolution. Ooh, and going to Roxbury and going to totalitarian centers and learning how the dominant culture was going to be ridding of us and planning to take us out to distant places that they've kept, you know, from World War I concentration camps. Woo! So all of that was going on for me. And then moving on, because I left Boston University after a semester, I was pretty depressed. But moving on in the corporate arena, worked on Wall Street after I got out of college. Wow, racism. It hit me hard. You know, it hit me hard. Hit me so hard that I had to leave the first job I had. You know, the racism was so deep. I never got to show my stuff, never got to do what I needed to do to show that I was just as competent as the others. And I was a rebel riser too, but this was 1975, so it was a little more dangerous. And you know, it kind of derailed my career at times. Well, now I'm in Winston-Salem for 20 years, and I've always said that the most racially oppressive workplace that I've ever worked at was R.J. Reynolds in Winston-Salem. Worked there as a professional, and there's a whole lot of stories I can tell you about that too. But when we talk about that internalized racial superiority and and internalized racial oppression, it plays out in the corporate sector so much. And that has brought me to really be very passionate about the institutional piece of racism, how it divides us all and pits us all against one another, and how the social construct is maintained in institutions. The Institute for Dismantling Racism is the organization that I represent, and it's been in operation since 2003. It started out as a result of the executive director, Willard Bass, attending Wake Forest University in divinity school, getting his divinity degree. And while he was at Wake Forest, he realized that there was so much division. Even there, you know, becoming ministers, everyone's supposed to be unified around God. But, you know, they even have a course there called Radical Jesus, because, you know, you're looking at all the different sides of how people see Jesus in their life, and how some people see him as inclusive, and as some people see him as exclusive. You know, same thing with institutions. Well, he decided, since one of his professors kept on asking him to come to this Radical Jesus course, and he would say, Willard, I want you to come over and come to the course and, you know, tell us good white folks what we're doing wrong and how we're perpetuating this thing you call racism. Didn't use those same words, but basically that's what he wanted him to do, is come teach. Teach, tell us your story, tell us your pain. So he told me, how many times I got to do this for you, for y'all? And that kind of started this impetus towards creating a mechanism where people can come from institutions and form coalitions to sit down and really look at racism and how it started, the origin of it, historically, you know, in Europe, and the whole thing around, you know, holding of power for political, well, for monetary gain. And we started out with just a core group of people. Started out at a church, which we're still at the Green Street Church, which is a Methodist, United Methodist Church. That's where we're housed. Started out in 2003, and we hold these trainings. Our trainings are 2.5-day trainings of anti-racism trainings that are conducted by Crossroads out of Chicago. What we do is we start out with a historical perspective. We actually put a wall, a blank wall of history on the board, on the walls. And after a short introduction to what we were doing, why we're there, what we're going to do in the 2.5 days, everyone is invited to get up and to fill the wall. The top piece of the wall, there's a line. The top piece of the wall is racism, the manifestations of racism, historically speaking, going forward from the 1800s until now. And then the bottom piece is resistance to it. And that's how we start out, getting it in the room. What has the dominant culture done to validate racism in this country? And what have people of color done to fight and resist against it? And if I can right now,